Good morning everyone and welcome to the meeting of WasteNet for today, the 14th of April. We have a fairly lengthy agenda today, but roughly 2/3 of it's of pictures and slides and other things. So there are a couple of significant decisions we need to make in the agenda today, but other things appear to be relatively straightforward. So are there any apologies today? I don't think so. Christine will return with us in a moment. Any declarations of interest today from any person? Appear to be not. So item 3, confirmation of the minutes of the Waste Advisory Group meeting held on Monday the 17th of February, which is at page 3 of the agenda. Are there any errors, omissions or other things that need to be drawn to attention, please?
I'll move those true and correct.
Sorry?
I'll move.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Rob? Any further issues? Appears to be not. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Item 4, the WasteNet Strategic Plan Execution and Activity Update, which is on page 8 of the agenda. There is a number of recommendations that are sitting in there. Firstly, to receive the report and then to give some direction as well. So Fiona, is there any matter that you want to comment on before we open it up?
Just since writing the report, there has been a further development with the Waste Minimisation Act review. So central government signalled that that would be reviewed and out for public consultation in April this year. That has informally been deferred until at some stage in a later time this year with no set time frame. So one of the recommendations there relating to the bylaw development process was to pause it while we waited for that central direction on legislation. So just an update on those timeframes, that they are going to be as early this year as what we had originally anticipated.
You said that the government delay was on the Waste Minimisation Act, but then referred to the bylaw. I guess what you're saying is there's a delay occurring to the waste minimisation process, but what's in your report on the bylaw still stays as is?
Yes, it's just part of the review of the Waste Minimisation Act will most likely encompass, amongst other things, the elements that are in there that relate to bylaws. So a big portion of the Waste Minimisation Act provides direction on solid waste bylaws.
Okay. So
just with that deferral.
All right. So on the basis that everyone's had a look at the report, are there any questions first, and then we'll talk through the issues? Appear to be not. All right. So I'll open it up for discussion, and probably the two key issues there, initially, well, before we get on to those, initially there's the overview with regard to the strategic plan summary, indicating there's a number of things complete, in progress, overdue, etc. So is there any feedback and comment on that, please? No, everyone seems to be happy with that. The waste strategy update, I think, is more for information, and then we go on to the activities update. And so in terms of the first section there, in terms of setting the scene, at present we've got the section 17A review being undertaken, and the intent is to come back with a report in June.
That's correct.
So that's more for information at this stage. Then we go on to the waste management and minimisation plan. So we have been asked to give some direction in terms of, given that there is a review coming, should we be proceeding with our review of it or waiting? And so I'll throw that open to the floor for discussion, please.
Sorry, what was the question? Oh, no.
So the question is that given that government is talking about bringing in some changes to the Waste Minimisation Act, should we be proceeding with our waste management and minimisation plan at this stage or delaying until we know more? And we'll come back and talk about the bylaws separately. Ian?
Look, I would sooner wait with the hope of a miracle coming out of central government that they will finally address product stewardship. And that if they want to achieve waste minimisation, we've got to look at the packaging of everything. I mean, it's pretty obvious. You don't have to be a rocket science of what the problems are, but they're not addressing it. They will let any company sell any product in any form of packaging. It doesn't have to pass any test for recycling. So I think we should wait. If it's June, is it?
So the government's reviewing the Waste Minimisation Act, and they had signalled that consultation with the public would occur in April, but that's been delayed. So
Unknown.
They had committed to having that in place before the next general election next year was the target timeline.
But do they consult with businesses?
So they have previously signalled that it will be for public consultation.
Right, that includes, so public includes
Yeah.
the business.
Rob?
Yeah.
At the risk of answering a question with a question, what would be the consequences of delaying for us?
Do you want to answer it and then I'll get my spin on it?
Okay. So the government
Okay.
had originally been revising their waste strategy, and they confirmed that they would revoke those previous policies around having to have curbside organics and the like. That's been confirmed, and last month they also released their waste strategy, so we do have some confidence around the direction. I guess the Waste Minimisation Act and the Litter Act is more the legislative framework that we would be operating in. So we have a level of certainty with the strategy, but it's just if there will be reforms for the legislation.
I see two potential issues. One, sliding of legislation tends to be on a slippery slope and slide even more. When you look at what's been happening to the RMA, where 5 years ago councils, including Gore, said let's delay our district plan until we see the new legislation. Well, council got sick of waiting to see the new legislation, and it turned out got it right. My concern in this case, from a process point of view, is that we have a waste minimisation plan that is way out of date, is of suspect status, and that's one issue, and I think we need to make progress. The second issue is that when you look at the list of things that are going to happen, that government is looking at, a lot of them are going to be national level responses to a number of issues that, in my view, are not going to have the impacts on a local level for the issues that we are facing here now. So in terms of what's the impact of waiting, it continues having in place a document that is past its time, and I'm not satisfied that in fact we're actually going to gain anything by waiting. So with regard to the waste minimisation plan, I believe we should continue to proceed. I think that there will be some minor tweaks that will be required once the government comes out with new legislation, but it's going to take it a while to get through that process as well. But much of what we prepare in the document will remain intact. So supplementary from that, Rob, and then I'll come back to Ian.
Just a comment, and I agree with you, and I think when the government comes out with any proposed changes, having done the work will help us to inform and submit and actually provide some relevance on there.
Yeah, good point. Ian?
Look, I totally get where you're coming from, where if you wait for government, and a classic example is with an RMA thing, with our wastewater discharge for Bluff, we had the choice in December to make a call and find a solution, but a certain group of council thought there was miracles happening, and we now find out that it's going to cost us tens of millions more. So it's about consequences, and I guess that's where my position is on this. How severe are the consequences from our decision? And in this case, there's no monetary consequences or anything. We're just looking at a delayed, bylaw.
Yeah, we'll come back to the bylaw. I think that's a
yeah.
separate issue.
Yeah. So that's, I guess, that's where I look at consequences.
Yeah, yeah, and I understand, and I'm fully supportive of the comments that you're making on stewardship. Until we get some national direction from government, it's not going to progress. But that is not going to be an issue that is impacted on by proceeding with waste management plan now.
Yeah, no, look, I
Yeah.
would be happy either way, actually,
Yeah.
with the WMMP.
Yeah. Neville, anything to add?
No, I'm quite fine with your suggestion, Mr. Chairman. How's the workload on Fiona on this? How's the workload?
Yeah, so
You know, because I know you have to do just sections of it and just leave bits out. So how's your workload on it?
we're well advanced with the WMMP.
You're right.
So the waste assessment's been complete, and we have Eunomia coming in later this morning to present that.
Yep.
So in terms of workload, we're fine from that perspective.
So I think, and Peter, anything to add?
No, Barry.
Sorry, Barry.
Yeah.
Barry.
I would probably put a bit of a hold on it, because this government seems to be sort of topsy-turvy of what they actually want in their legislations. I can hear what you're saying, that we need a plan. This government seems to be really topsy-turvy about what the decisions they're making.
Yeah, I go back, I guess, to what I said earlier. When you look at the list of things that they're indicating changes happening,
Yeah.
it's not going to impact what's in our plan.
No.
So do we have a general consensus around the table? And sorry, Christine, you came in a little bit later. Is there anything you want to add?
No, happy to go ahead.
Okay. So there appears to be a bit of consensus around the table that we should proceed with the waste minimisation plan, and we'll frame that into a motion shortly. The other aspect that's there is the bylaw issue, and I think when you see the indication from government in terms of the potential changes that can impact on bylaws, I think that it's appropriate to put that one on hold until we've got more certainty. The bylaw is a statutory document, and clearly the government's thinking on what should be and shouldn't be in those documents will have a direct bearing on the outcome. So I guess where I'm coming from is the bylaw going on to hold. Is there any other feedback around the table?
That sounds logical, yeah.
Yeah. Christine, Neville?
No, I'm just happy with all the recommendations that you put down through.
Okay, yeah. And Barry,
Yeah.
happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we go back to the recommendations that we've got in the report, firstly, that we receive the strategic plan execution and activity document. That number 2 then, A, would be not to proceed with the current regional solid waste bylaw development process. So that's the easy way of dealing with that. And continue with the current regional solid, that's 2. Then 3A, endorse the program approach to the Waste Advisory Group receiving and adopting the proposed waste management and minimisation plan under delegations. Now, under delegations, what's that mean?
So for that recommendation, we are seeking direction on more of the technical process for which group can receive and adopt the plan, if it has to go back to each individual council, or if that's a function for the Waste Advisory Group under delegations within the joint agreement.
Okay, so in terms of 3, just some direction appears we need both A and B. But B refers to provide direction on the process. What are you looking for there?
So we're seeking direction if it's appropriate just to bring the waste assessment and the draft WMMP to this group, or if it's appropriate to engage with each individual council in some form, as well as obviously the delegations would sit with this group, but whether it's appropriate to have that material presented to each individual council also.
So from a process point of view, the options are we approve the plan for going up for consultation versus taking it to each of the individual councils for approval. Some feedback on that, please. Ian?
Through the chair, I'd like to ask Erin, she's our General Manager of Infrastructure, and just if you'd like to see it come through at a committee level first, and then get spat out back to the process. From your point of view. Yeah.
So from my point of view, the appropriate place for any policy or bylaw, etc., on waste that pertains to WasteNet should go through the WAG in the first instance and then go to the respective councils following that.
Okay, yep.
So that points to us preparing the draft and then going to the councils for endorsement prior to notification.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So the way that would read then is to proceed. Well, the first one is to endorse the programmed approach. Secondly, for the WAG to sign off may not be the right word, but to sign off on a draft of the waste management and minimisation plan for adoption by each of the individual WasteNet councils.
Can I recommend endorse is often a good word?
Endorse, okay. So to be endorsed by the individual councils prior to public notification.
So, sorry, I would suggest that it's endorsed by the Waste Advisory Group and then approved by the respective councils.
So please read out the whole of the motion then for B.
Well, I need to pull all the notes. Sorry, we don't have the motion up the top. I don't have it in front of me at the moment, so I'm having some issues with my board books. It would simply be an amendment to the word where you advised that the role of the Waste Advisory Group, for the Waste Advisory Group, yes, to endorse the proposed program of the way, no, it's not. Endorse the proposed program of the Waste Advisory Group, receiving and endorsing the proposed waste management and minimisation plan under delegations and recommending to the WasteNet councils for approval.
Can I ask what would happen then at that point, the approval stage at each council, if there was any strong feedback that wanted change or modification or something? What would then be the process?
In the event of that happening, it would need to come back to this group to work through. Christine,
Thank you. Just looking at
can you move the mic a bit closer? Thanks.
Sorry, thank you. Just thinking about the timeframes here, which have included that, and we have an election process coming up. What are your thoughts around when it's coming to the councils if the draft is ready in July?
Yeah, I don't think that there'll be anything particularly contentious in there. We do have time in that under legislation we're not required to formally adopt a new one until June next year. So we do have time from that perspective.
I think you're not thinking so much of whether it's contentious or not, but whether it becomes before the current council, or will it come after the change in those councillors that could be around the table, and which is best?
If timing allows, I'm really keen that while we've got this group around the table, that we're signing off on it and taking it to the councils. And I see my role of actually going to the council meetings and working through any issues. If there is a glitch in it, then that may result in final sign-off for public notification until after the elections.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
Thanks. Just further to that, Keith, and I'm just sort of getting my head around, it's one of the nuances of these shared services. Where does the final delegation actually lie? So to Rangi's point, if it went back to the councils and a particular council took exception to it, it comes back to here, do we have the final delegation? And like how many times do we go backwards? And like, yeah, I'm just trying to think of where that final decision actually rests, because I guess that's one of the challenges. But if we face ourselves in that situation, who has the final call?
I think in terms of the current document that we're operating under, provided that it doesn't have a financial implication, it may rest with us. But I think that needs to be checked. And one of the reasons of reviewing the whole approach was to tidy up the delegations. From an efficiency point of view, having a group like this with the ability to do it all is effective and efficient. Because we don't get the councils to sign off on our budgets. So that would tend to reinforce, yes, it's us, or this group. Any other discussion and point?
I do just have a question around that 17A review in general, if you're happy to take that now before we go to the recommendations.
Well, I think we can do it after it because
Okay.
it's standalone. So in effect, we've got...
Chair, can I just clarify just on the budgets? That the Waste Advisory Group has delegation around what's collected through the levy and that budget associated with that.
Yeah.
When it comes to the actual collection services that are provided, that are funded by the individual councils, and that's the point at which it's got to go back to the individual councils for approval. And so whilst there is a role for the WAG to approve policy type decisions, because I would expect the WMMP to have a budget implication on those budgets held by the various councils, that's why I'd recommend it going back to them.
Thank you. Yes, I overlooked the other contracts. All right, so we've got three aspects to the recommendations. One, that we receive the WasteNet Strategic Plan Execution and Activity Update. Two, that we pause the current regional solid waste bylaw development process. And then moving to three, that we endorse the programmed approach of the WasteNet Advisory Group and endorsing again the proposed waste management and minimisation plan under delegations for recommending to the WasteNet councils for approval. So can I have a mover and a seconder for those, please?
I'll move.
Ian, moving. Neville, second. Any further discussion? I'll put the three motions then. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. So I think that's probably the key decisions that need to come out of today. So you're perfectly clear where to now?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Which then takes us on to the next page of my running sheet. Item 5, the WasteNet key performance indicators, which are on page 14 of the agenda. So we have a report there. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No further developments for that one?
Are there any questions from the report or feedback? I've got one question. The picture that's on page 15 that shows the waste volumes to the landfill and then the discussion about recycling data, that it's sitting about a similar effect. When Gore goes to recycling, will that have an immediate impact in terms of the amount that's going to recycling? What can we anticipate happening to the chart and the figures?
Yes, so we would anticipate that those figures would flow through to here. I think from the outset, one of the focal areas would be around contamination, just with that reintroduction of services.
Yeah, sorry, I was referring to the wrong pretty diagram. Yes. So that shows us tracking below last year, but then we had a natural event that distorted the figures from last year.
For contamination?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, so we are tracking below, and you can see in February was when we reintroduced the bin inspections. So it's probably still too early to see if that's had, or what the effect of those are, but we are definitely below last year.
All right. Any discussion arising from that report, Rob?
If it's not too difficult, it would be useful to see that graph without the Blue Cliffs spike in there, just to kind of see like a relative kind of tracking, but no biggie if it's a mission.
Or showing it as a shaded area above the line or
Yeah.
something, yeah. All right, there doesn't appear to be any other discussion. Can I have a mover that we receive the report?
I think
Yeah.
Christine's got a question.
Sorry,
Right.
Christine.
I was going to make a comment in relation to the bin inspections, because if we haven't got a lot of information about that yet, data. But at what point, or how might we go back to the ratepayer and tell them what the outcome is as a kind of positive news story?
So we do, there's a paper a bit further on in the agenda about data, but we do,
Yes.
yeah, we do definitely have data that we can provide back to the community. We've introduced the 3-strike system on the 31st, and it's built a really clear picture from the education period around that data.
So you're thinking that data could go out rather than wait to the 3 months after the 31st when it's actually implemented?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
That'll be good. Thank you.
Rob, apologies, we were going to come back to you to ask your question earlier. Is it related to this, or should we deal with it?
I was just on the 17A reviews and the progress. I know we've got workshops coming to our respective councils, but just a bit of a kind of an outline of where things are at is kind of just what I was looking for. So don't know when you want to introduce that, or even offline, maybe even.
Yeah, we can have a chat about that later, yeah. All right, so in terms of, do we have a mover and a seconder?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to make comment
No.
in regards to the contamination. I see it didn't alter very much between the two periods of time for the 17 to 18%. So it'll be interesting to see with the bin inspection on how frequent it drops, or how quickly it drops. So with a bit of education, because I'm just looking at the cost factor in education and radio and programs and things that we've done so far, to be, if it's cost that's spent that wisely, because at the end of the day the percentage change hasn't changed very much in contamination over the four-year period.
The indication from what comes up later in the agenda is that there seems to be a sudden uplift in people responding to getting stickers on their bins. So hopefully that flows through to the figures
Correct.
as well.
Yeah.
Barry?
Yeah, it was nice to see. I had an inspection down my street the other day, and it was nice to see all the labels on the bins of all good ones.
So how did you get on?
Good as gold.
Oh, okay. Right, so can I have a mover and seconder for the two recommendations in the report, please? Barry, moved. Second, Christine. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Item 6, which is on page 17, is the WasteNet bi-monthly financial update. Anything further to add, Fiona?
No, nothing further to add to this one.
It's quite noticeable, the drop-off in debtors in the less than 30 days, or greater than 30 days, is it? But when I see that it was the 14th of January, people hadn't paid over the Christmas New Year period, and it's probably come back to what you would reasonably expect it to be. Is that the case?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. Any other feedback in terms of that report, Rob?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a concern around the greater than 90 days increasing, and that's still quite a big number. And just wondering what we're kind of doing around managing that and getting that down to hopefully close to zero.
So the report speaks to the majority of these balances being across a small number of debtors, and one of those in particular has a large portion of their overdue account over that 90 days. They have since agreed to a payment plan, so that is being progressed, but it is going to be something that's going to take a bit of time to bring that value down.
Are we charging interest at all on the overdue amount?
Not at present, but that's something that we're pursuing to see if there's a function there after the last week.
Yeah, so at the last meeting we discussed it, and the outcome was to leave it to the discretion of staff that had that tool available to them if need be. Christine?
Sorry, and just in addition, the other two debtors over 90 days, have they paid since?
Their balances don't sit as much in their over 90 days. They sit in the first two categories, and they have been making progress with their
So
payments.
there's only one in the over 90 days?
Yep.
So we've got a recommendation that the report be received. If I can have a mover and a seconder, please. And can I have some water, please? Can someone grab some water for me? Thank you. Move Christine, second Neville. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Item 7 on page 20, the WasteNet Education and Communications Activity Update. Anything further to add there, Fiona?
Just one interesting thing that has happened since the last update is the pull from the community to engage more around waste minimisation and also correct recycling habits, and that's just a flow on from the bin inspection program. So we've received a lot more requests for presentations at various community groups and things.
In the background, it refers to the aim is that all residents, schools and businesses in the Southern region will have a better understanding of waste minimisation. We'll hear a little bit more about it in one of our presentations, but what involvement or what happens on Stewart Island?
So this year we've had the Waste Free Wanda. She did a school presentation there with primary schools and the kindy, and there was also a beach clean-up day. Apart from our general kind of advertising through radio and the like, that's the extent of it this year.
Any other comment or feedback, please, in terms of the update? Ian?
I'll squeeze this one in here, because it's not an easy one. It's about communication about, I guess, litter. Now, you know, I don't know, does litter come under WasteNet's umbrella, or is that someone else's worry?
So not fly tipping, general.
Litter, people dropping crap. Okay, so like I was out at Sandy Point last week walking the dog, and wherever I was by the mountain cycle track or something, there's a rubbish bin. But it was overflowed, it was mountained, and then everything was mountained around it. You know, like it was, obviously people were trying to do the right thing, but it was a bit of a cartoon joke, really. You know, this one bin. So is that part of our process to make sure that those bins are emptied more frequently, or?
That's the service provided by your council there.
Yeah. Does that come under our watch?
It is part of the service that's provided by the territorials, and I think we don't have an administrative role in it. It may well be that we have a advocacy role.
Right, okay, I just wondering, obviously there's a contract with someone that picks the bin up, but maybe the frequency of the bin pickup isn't right.
Yeah, now if it happened in Gore, I'd actually lodge a customer service request.
Right.
And get the council to do something about it. Erin?
Yeah, I would just bring the distinction that it depends whether it's a WasteNet issue or a respective council issue. as to who does the collection of the bin. There are public litter bins that are collected by WasteNet contractors, but often in the reserves they are collected by the respective councils. So it'd just be something that we'd need to have a look at and absolutely look at whether we need to amend the collection frequency of it.
So the other, just carrying on with the litter and general litter of people just discarding stuff together, you know, they might get a takeaway food, park somewhere, eat it out the window. Is that something that is worrying each of our 3 councils?
Periodically, definitely.
And does that litter come through here, or is that just
Yeah.
a separate council?
Literally, under the Litter Act.
Literally.
Yeah, under the Litter Act, it's a matter that can be dealt with under a bylaw. And whether it should be in a region-wide bylaw or in individual council bylaws is something that, once we're focusing on bylaws, needs to be worked through. Certainly at an enforcement level, we don't have the people out there walking around that can do enforcement. We'd be looking at the councils for that, no doubt.
Well, I guess I was looking at communication, you know, this packed on was this communication, but it's communicating with the public. You know, if you're trying to educate them not to put the wrong thing in the yellow bin, well, at the same time, could you possibly educate them that the actual street is not a refuse bin? You know, I don't know, you know, I mean, obviously, to us, it's obvious, but, you know, we are dealing with some interesting people.
Yeah. Christine,
Sorry, just a comment and further to, I think it was Neville's.
closer to the mic, please.
Further to Neville's comment before, but given the interest in workshops since we've been conducting the tests on bins, I wonder whether it's worth discussion in the future about what that's telling us about our advertising and how successful it is, given that we seem to be doing the same thing all the time without any reduction in the percentages. So how might we look at doing that differently in the future and evaluate the effectiveness of it? And further to your point just previously was around the litter. I think I've raised it before on a few occasions, particularly where community activities have gone and picked up the litter on our road signs, and a considerable amount has been picked up. So again, how can that be incorporated into our education successfully? Again, evaluating it and targeting what we need to do. Thank you.
Rob.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just on the WasteNet Community Waste Minimisation Fund, did we get good applications this time around?
Yes, so we have just recently closed it and the evaluation has been complete last week, so we'll be bringing a paper in June, but we did get a number of applications and they were quite wide-ranging, so from a real array of different community groups, which was really good, and also across the region as well. So looking that we'll be at or close to the top of that fund.
So just a further question to that, noting that there's only a balance of 22 grand there, and we do have quite a lot in reserve. If there were worthy recipients there, would there be the opportunity for this committee to extend it? Because I know it's kind of been up and down in terms of being undersubscribed, and now maybe, I haven't seen them, but it sounds like it could be potentially oversubscribed. Do we have the ability to change that number?
It would need to be approved by this group. We approve budgets on an annual basis. We've done extraordinary additions to the budget in terms of some of the work streams we've got going on at present. So I believe, yes, we would have the ability of coming back saying there's a worthy thing here. And I guess offline there were some issues that arose from that process that I think are worth exploring with that type of thing in mind.
And I guess signalling from me to the panel that I would certainly have an appetite to explore that if you saw good applications coming through that didn't meet that,
Yep.
me personally anyway. But,
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so can I have a mover and a seconder then for the education and communication update? Neville, or was it a question?
No, just a move, but I've just got a comment that I'd just like to bring forward, that in the weekend I was travelling to Riverton, and I noted that there was a rubbish new sign put up on State Highway 99, which is to out that way, and just after Woodlands, and I'm just wondering, is that part of Transit's signage, or have we got any, because it didn't to me look like it was, stood out at me, you know, when you're trying to travel at 100 kilometres an hour, all it's got is a bit of a rubbish thing with a big zero and a cross on it, and I'm just thinking, is that something that we need to ask them, or do they need some advice on some really decent looking signage, or?
So those signs have been provided by NZTA, they're throughout the region,
Right.
and we haven't had any input into those signage.
You have?
We have not, no.
But it might be worthwhile going back to them saying, look, in terms of the messaging that we want put out there, can we work together with you in terms of what goes up on those signs that achieves both what NZTA are after plus some of our
Like they're reasonably large signs, and they're on two posts, and I'm just thinking that even if you head on the bottom, keep your rubbish in your car or something like that, you know? Keep your rubbish in your car is probably stand out more than a circle with a big
Or
cross on
take
it.
your rubbish home, yeah.
Keep your rubbish in your car.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a comment, but yeah, happy to move this report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and can I have a seconder, please? Rob, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Item 8, which is the recycling bin inspections and enforcement program, which is on page 25. And lots of interesting data in a couple of tables there. So anything to add, Fiona?
Just that this data is representative of our second phase, which was the education and sort of pilot phase, if you will. So it was till the sort of the latter part of March.
Any discussion arising from that? Appears to be not, so can I have a mover and a seconder for that we receive the report, please? Thank you, Barry. Move. Second. Ian. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We will now have an adjournment for 15 minutes, or 10 minutes, so that we can get ready for the presentation that we're receiving from the Regional Climate Change Working Group. And I see that we have Anchor at the back there and join us for a morning tea. So we're adjourned for 10 minutes. Thank you. And we're going to have a presentation that's in the nice pictures that we have in our agenda at page 28 with regard to the Regional Climate Change Framework for Action. So we have Councillor Phil Morrison here and Inka Hapgood to do the presentation. So in your hands, guys, you do need to move these mics very close to you, like a couple of inches away.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you for giving us the time to speak today. I'm aware that some of what I'm going to cover, some folk in the room are familiar with this, while others may not be as familiar. I apologise for that. We will try and find a happy balance between too much detail and sufficient detail. What I'm here today, I guess, representing is the co-chair of the Regional Climate Change Working Group, which is an effort which sees the partnership of all of our councils in the region, along with Te Ao Marama Incorporated, working on a climate change strategy and a climate change framework for action for the region. So a collaboration across all of the councils to find synergies, to find solutions that are going to work best for our region. I've got up there a copy of the cover of a piece of work that's already been adopted by each of the councils. That's the Phase 1 strategy document, which was our first piece of work. And when people look at that, they might say it seems a little bit incomplete, and there's a very good reason that it was designed that way. And the reason is that when we first convened to start our work, we realised ahead of the long-term plan update process last year, we weren't going to have time to deliver a complete solution. So we broke it into two parts, and we thought we've got time to deliver and consult with the public on the Phase 1 strategy, and having achieved that, we'll complete the work by the complementary Phase 2, which is the framework for action, which we are working on at the moment, and that will be something that we speak about today. When we publish that framework for action, we're going to carry forward a couple of key items from the Phase 1 strategy to make sure we don't lose sight of them. The first thing will be these aspirations, the 7 aspirations which were a feature of our Phase 1 strategy. They'll carry forward and guide our continuing work. And the second thing that will carry forward from the Phase 1 strategy is the aspirations that the region has identified for our regional climate change response. And so those principles and aspirations were two key aspects of the Phase 1 strategy document. So we're currently working on the framework for action. On that particular title page, it's got draft, and it will remain draft until it goes in front of each of the councils and Te Ao Marama later this year to accept that framework for action, at which point we can take the draft label off. And this is actually a really big focus for the Regional Climate Change Working Group, because we've realised we understand and recognise we've got about 2 months to complete this work in order to get it in front of each council before the people start thinking about the next election cycle and the next triennium. The purpose of the framework for action, that's quite wordy. It speaks to a range of things that the framework for action will do, and we'll speak a little bit more about some of these purposes as we go through this presentation. But something that you will see in the framework for action is we've got 5 draft regional outcomes, and they're represented in that picture, that graphic there, with some words alongside them, sort of speaking to what we mean by each of them. And of course, no particular outcome is paramount. They all work alongside each other and have equal weighting, and which helps us as a bit of a checklist to consider our actions, what we're recommending. Will it contribute to each of these in some way? This slide is a little bit busy, but it conveys quite an important sense for what the framework for action will do. What that picture conveys is tries to convey a sense of 4 documents. On the left-hand side, you've got the Phase 1 strategy, which is already complete. The second one along is the framework for action, which is near completion, only a couple of months away. But a key thing that that framework for action will do is to establish a process for ongoing regional climate action planning. And so the third document, and followed by the fourth, they convey the idea that there'll be a climate action plan produced every 3 years, or updated every 3 years, with a 10-year horizon, but with the next 3 years in detail. And that will probably sound very familiar to many, because that's how we manage the LTP update process. The idea would be that the climate action plan for the region will remain a draft ahead of the LTP updates, but each council will be informed by that climate action plan as a draft and can carry forward into their own LTP consultation documents any initiatives that are relevant to their communities and their council. And through the LTP update process, they will come back to us and say, well, of the range of things you recommended, we got a green light or we got a thumbs up from our community for the following things, but maybe not for some of the others. And as we take stock of all 4 councils going through that process, by the end of it, we'll know across the region what can we continue with and what needs to be parked up or considered differently for the future. So that's will establish a cycle of updating that climate action plan every 3 years to support the public consultation process of each council in turn. We've been pretty busy, and I might pause and turn to Anka to talk to this slide and a couple that follow it, talking about our communication engagement efforts in recent months.
So one of the key things as part of the development of the regional climate change strategy was that there was a formal public consultation process that ran alongside the Environment Southland LTP. There were 60 odd submissions, and those submissions were pretty representative of both ends of the spectrum, not a huge amount in the mid-range, so either really pro doing something about and creating a regional response to climate change, and particularly the mandate for developing a collaborative approach. And then there were also the other end of the spectrum, where there's still some questions about the science and whether this is something that people believe in or not. But one of the other key messages that came through that process was that we hadn't done any early engagement. It was pretty much a local government focused process at that point in time, working towards getting the local government agencies on the same page. And so there was essentially a commitment at that point in time to make sure that as we worked through the development of the regional framework for action, that we would go through a number of steps to make sure that we did do early engagement. And so as part of that, in the early months of this year, we've had a multi-staged approach in terms of having an online form available, and that's what this slide is referring to, the fact that people can provide their feedback online. And there's some 3 key questions there that we've been using for that. We've also been attending AMP shows, a variety of AMP shows around the region. SIT Orientation Week is another one. The Invercargill City Central, we had a pop-up booth in the mall at one point, the Multicultural Festival. Yesterday, Councillor Morrison and I both attended the Murahuku Marae Open Day. It's quite a range of events, but all of those things that we've attended and the online forms as well, those 3 key questions that we had on the previous slide were quite informative to that. And one of the first questions was what have people been experiencing in terms of their lifetime in your area with respect to our changing climate. And it was a really good opening question, and I guess people initially think about, what was the climate like when they were younger and what is it like now. And there's been a lot of things that have come through as part of that in terms of the seasons shifting. Somebody told me yesterday that they used to walk to school with hot stones in their hands to keep their hands warm on frosty and snowy days. Well, you wouldn't want, that wouldn't be something that kids these days would have to do. And so that was a really good opening question. And then the second question is, are you doing anything differently because of our changing climate? Now, what was really interesting about this question is that a lot of people are connecting their recycling, for example, reducing the amount of things that they use, making sure that they compost, and a whole lot of those aspects that are in a, you know, what we usually think of as a waste conversation. They're connecting as things that they are doing in response to a changing climate. So the last question there is, what actions are needed to support our region's response to a changing climate? This is where we're really keen to hear people's feedback on, you know, what is it that people think that councils should be doing differently or more in this space to try and, you know, create a regional response. So all of those three questions have been really valuable. One of the key things is that we're pulling this together in terms of a communications and engagement report, which we've already started bringing to the table at the Regional Climate Change Working Group. We had a workshop last week where we worked through a draft version of this report. Some of these things are still ongoing, meetings such as today, for example. So there's probably at least another few weeks of where we're trying to actively seek this kind of feedback from our community and from key stakeholders. One of the key things we also had just over a week ago was a climate change hui at the Invercargill's Working Men's Club. That was quite well attended with around about 80 people in attendance, a mix of local government agencies as well as industry and key stakeholders and interested parties. It was quite a well represented group of people from around the region. And we, as part of that workshop, as part of that hui, we started talking about what is it that we need to do to achieve one aspiration in particular, which is aspiration 11 in the regional climate change strategy. We build a regional community of learning. So there was a lot of learning that was taking place at the hui itself, and so the reflection was, how do we make sure that we can continue that learning together and collaboratively and as much as possible.
Thank you. So perhaps just to conclude some key reflections to date, having worked on this piece of work for just over 2 and a bit years now, 4 points that I'd probably want to share, and that is, the first one is it's important to keep the long game in mind, and by that I mean that there's a very strong sense that climate change response is not a one and done kind of event. It's going to be an ongoing effort required, adapting to new information and adapting to how our environment changes as a result of climate change. The second one is to be prepared to own our climate change issues as a region, especially in the adaptation space. Other regions are going to have their own challenges. They will have money to invest in their own regions. We need to be prepared to self-help to the greatest degree possible and manage our issues within the region to the best of our ability. Third insight is that collaboration comes at a cost, but equally failing to collaborate will also penalise our communities. So it's been heartening to see the strong level of collaboration within the region, and we're very thankful to all of the councils for contributing, along with Te Ao Marama. And probably the fourth and final one for me is how important it is to enable democracy within this process, to keep your community informed, engage with them, consult with them, and importantly listen to them, so that whatever action or investment is made in climate action, it is mandated and legitimate in the eyes of our community. So those would be the 4 that I would prioritise at this point in time. And I guess just reflecting that we're an interagency collaborative effort. We're quite informal, so we don't have a great deal of authority other than being able to share information that influences each of the councils. But I would imagine there's a bit of a similar or a crossover challenge with WasteNet, given that it's also an interagency collaborative effort. But we welcome thoughts, suggestions or questions.
So I'll open it up for any comment or feedback people wish to give. Ian?
I guess emissions is what it's all about. Now, it's an interesting fact someone made about kids walking to school with warm stones in their hands. Now, it's not so much the warm stones bit that interests me, it's kids walking to school, which is something that, wow, did they used to do that? I live just off Layard Street in Invercargill and surrounded by, I think, 5 or 6 schools, and I just do not get in my car between 8 and 9 o'clock because of the parent drop-off. Now, the emission alone from those parents taking their kids to school is just, it must be phenomenal. And they weren't all EVs, I'm quite sure. But anyway, that's just an aside. I guess from a WasteNet point of view, what I see, and one of the things that takes a bad rap is our solid waste disposal area out at AB Lime. Now they obviously have a gas capture system and they have to report on their gas capture system. And the last report I saw was they collect 130% of the gas actually emitted. So how can you do that? Well, the way that works is you work out the volume of material going in and it produces X amount of gas and you should collect that, but they're collecting more. So, but the key thing about AB Lime and the landfill out there is they're just installing a 1 megawatt generator, which on the spot market, power price wise, anything between $1 and $2.5 million of power it will generate into the grid. Now what that does, it makes waste a resource, okay? And I don't see us treating waste as a resource. We especially green waste, you know, kitchen waste. The place it needs to go to is AB Lime. We turn it into electricity. We save other forms of say, diesel or coal making electricity. So I just don't see focus on that. And I believe, well, it's our committee's role, I suppose. We have a chance to be a partner with AB Lime if we want to. I know of other landfills around New Zealand that are onto their second and third generators. So they're producing up to 3 megawatts. And that's a lot of electricity. So I just wonder where the climate change people see waste as a resource, or do you see it as a problem? And the great thing you didn't mention here was that nasty word composting, which I think is one of the worst things for emission known to mankind. You're better off in the landfill making electricity. So sorry to be a bit long-winded, but...
No, you summarised a couple of good points there, so yeah, throw it back.
Yeah, I think we remain, I would say that in some respects our thinking is quite early and that we've taken a very broad perspective. For instance, some of the investments that we are making in the next couple of years and understanding some of the science is very much looking at the region as a whole and what our risks are going to be with updates to our climate change impact assessment and understanding the regional risk assessment. I think at this point in time we are very supportive of anything that contributes to a circular economy effect as we decarbonise our economy. Capturing energy from waste streams seems like a very sensible thing for us to promote and encourage, and it's interesting we often reflect on what's in our lane as local government and what sits adjacent to our lane. Are we getting in the road of businesses and other organisations making changes that they could easily make, or maybe not easily, but would be easier for them to make if we were to somehow change some of our rules and get out of the way and make it more simple for people to make those kind of changes and investments. And I guess that's part of why we had the WHO is we realised we need to start asking our community what they need from us or what they need for us to do to get out of the way to enable them to make change more quickly. So no, I think that's entirely valid to consider how we can harness waste streams for energy or for greater value return.
Christine.
Thank you for your presentation. Was there anything that came up in your workshop you held at the beginning of the month around waste and opportunities for us as an advisory group to do something around this area?
What emerges, I've spoken to some of the community boards in different corners of Southland, Tianau Community Board, and their focus on, how does tourism play out in that region and how does waste managed within that, both from the tourist groups themselves, the tourist operators and the community. It was interesting to talk to the community board on Stewart Island via Zoom one evening and hear their thoughts about, how do they manage waste in that unique environment. Other things that came up from that community board were things like, does our work support their thinking in the future around a managed retreat if necessary, as well as energy sources for the future. It probably reminds us that each community is going to have a unique set of adaptation challenges, and then it's really interesting to reflect on if those are the adaptation challenges which are somewhat unique to that community, then how does the waste management piece align with those challenges? Because I would imagine that maybe there's slightly different solutions needed depending on the challenges of each community, which may not lend itself to an efficient single solution for everyone. It may incur more cost, in fact, if there's have to be a slightly different design of waste management systems for each corner of Southland. I'm speculating a little bit, experts around the table.
No, it's just kind of thinking if there's opportunities to feed back to us from consultations and workshop that you have, because we don't know what we don't know, that would be useful rather than us going out and doing it separately again. It may be something that we can take advantage of and incorporate into our planning.
It seems very sensible. I was just going to say that we've already identified that Great South and EMS are two other agencies we need to be increasing our communication with, and so WasteNet might also sit alongside.
I think there's also a lot of potential in the fact that we're getting a general sense that people are already connecting these two areas in terms of what they're doing, even the little actions that people are doing individually in the waste space, in a sense that that's also connected in terms of their way of responding to our changing climate. So I think in terms of our comms and engagement generally, I think there's a lot of room to work through with this group to try and make sure that those messages are aligned. So even the question about compost earlier was like, so if WasteNet are wanting a particular framing of that, then we want to make sure that we weren't contradicting each other in that space, and that actually we were making the most of what this document is able to do and support that space, and vice versa, that it's a two-way thing.
Any other feedback and comments? Phil, I was pleased that you've had talkies with the Stewart Island Community Board, because much of our focus tends to be on the mainland, but we've got some particular circumstances applying over there across a whole range of issues. And one of the speakers at the Hui was advocating promotion of Stewart Island as the first fully electric island in the world, I think he would say. So that a total move away from fossil fuels. And he was a motivational speaker. He really was great in terms of what you can do to cut down on fossil fuel use, and other options are available. And I think that we have a role in that type of thing as well. So if there's no other comments or feedbacks, thank you to both of you, Phil and Anka, in terms of what you've talked about here today. And I see this as a dialogue that there's cross-pollination between both groups that we need to keep talking over time and taking advantage, as Christine said, of what we learn through our individual processes of actually sharing the outcomes and reducing or taking advantage of that. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Kia ora.
Appreciate it. Next we're going to hear from Lisa, who is, how do you pronounce that name? Oh, you know Mia. Okay, come forward.
It's a Greek god, the Greek god of orderliness and logic. There is a theory behind the madness.
So does the name Eunice have something to do with that, does it?
I can tell you, actually, it does register. Does anybody know any Eunice? Particularly logical.
So you have a presentation for us today which has been loaded, and someone might have given you a little instrument.
morning, everybody. Thank you for
Now,
having
bring
me.
the
Can you
mic
hear me,
really
or
close.
I need it closer?
Yeah.
How's that? Is that better? That's great. Good morning. Thank you for having me. As you've just heard, I work for a company called Eunomia Research and Consulting. We are specialist waste consultants. We are not engineers, so we're not going to build you a transfer station or a landfill. We specialise in data research and analysis and strategy development, and we have been working with the councils of the Southland region through WasteNet on putting together something called the waste assessment, which is the first stage in the waste planning process. So I've got a fair few slides to get through. Some of them have interesting numbers on them. Some of them are probably not going to be quite so interesting. I'll try and move through it reasonably quickly, but if you do have any questions at any point, I'm really happy for you to just stop me and say, hang on a second, we didn't get that. Can you go through that again? Okay? So the waste planning process. What I'm going to do this morning is just quickly take you through the waste planning process and just give you an overview of what it is that we do, why we do it. The first step in the process is the waste assessment, which we're in the final stages of, so I'll just take you through the key outcomes from the waste assessment. It's very long, and some of you may be dedicated enough to read it, but I'm just going to cover off the key highlights from that report. And one of the main outcomes from the waste assessment is the identification of what we call key issues, which are basically the problems that we see in the way that waste is managed in the region, and then the next step is to have a talk about what we could potentially do about them. So this pretty little diagram is a bit of an overview of the waste planning process, and what we start off with is the waste assessment, and the waste assessment in this instance has been prepared as a regional report. So in many cases it makes sense to prepare the waste assessment as a collaboration between councils, and this is generally because you share facilities, you share services, and often sharing a landfill. And so in the case of the Southland region, with WasteNet in place, it made a lot of sense to prepare the waste assessment as a regional document. And then the next stage in the process is the decision whether or not to rewrite your waste management and minimisation plan. And this is a decision that is informed by the waste assessment and by having a look at your current WMMP and making an evaluation as to how relevant it still is and whether we think it does need to be rewritten or not. The next stage in the process is one that is not actually required by legislation, but it's often undertaken by councils, and this is going out to talk to communities to find out what they think and what they would like to see done about waste issues before you actually start writing your next WMMP. And this is something that the WasteNet councils would really like to see happen in Southland for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about some of those reasons later on. And then we move on to writing the draft WMMP. That is a document which is both a strategic and action plan. So it has usually two sections. We talk about the strategic context, the overall direction that we see waste management and minimisation taking in the region, and then the second part is an action plan. And the WMMP is intended to cover a period of roughly 6 years, although we often look out further than that. The WMMP has to go through the full statutory consultation process, so it has to go out for public consultation for a month, and then at the end of that you go through your normal hearings process and you can adopt your final plan, and then the next challenge is actually making everything happen. So firstly, just to take you through the waste planning process, and my fonts have turned into a very interesting font in your version. Hopefully
hopefully all of the text is gonna, it's not actually, you don't actually have all of the text on the slides, so I might have to just tell you some of it. So the waste planning process, the waste assessment is described in the Waste Minimisation Act, which is the primary legislation that dictates how we manage waste in New Zealand. And as I said, it is a lengthy technical report. We try and collect all of the information and data that we can find about how waste is managed in the region, and then we analyse that information. Often councils will undertake something called a SWAP, which is a solid waste analysis protocol survey, and this is where people actually pick up the rubbish and they sort through it and they categorise it, and so we find out exactly what is in the rubbish that is picked up at the curbside and at the transfer station and at the main landfill in the region. And from all of that information, we try to work out what is actually going on with waste management in the region. Where are things changing? What are the trends that we can see coming through? And we also undertake some benchmarking of those numbers against other councils and other areas in the country. There's some legal requirements. The waste assessment has to consider both your local strategic environment, so this is your long-term plans, your regional plans. It also has to consider the national strategic context. And then the point that's not on the slide, the final part of the waste assessment is that identification of key issues. So this is where we look at all of the information and we say, okay, right, so what does this information actually tell us? Where are the problems? What are the possible ways that we could solve the problems? A few more regulatory requirements. The waste assessment has to be completed every 6 years, and this is because it is a preparatory step for writing a new WMMP, if that's what you're going to do. And a crucial part of the waste assessment is that review of your current WMMP. And a recommendation is made in the waste assessment whether we think that you can keep your WMMP as it is, or whether it needs to be amended or revoked and you need to write a new one. We also need to consult with the Medical Officer of Health, and this seems like a bit of a strange thing to do, because what does the Medical Officer of Health have to do with waste? But because councils have obligations under the Health Act to manage waste responsibly, there's a requirement in the Act for us to check in with the Medical Officer of Health and make sure that they're happy with what we've said. Another really good reason to complete your waste assessment and your review of your WMMP is that the payment from government of the waste disposal levy funds that are returned to the councils is contingent on undertaking that review every 6 years. Any questions on that? Great. So to move on to the next stage in the process, which is the WMMP. So with the waste assessment being a really long and involved technical document, the WMMP is very different. This is the document that the public see. This is a document that we want them to understand and read and engage with. And one of the reasons that's really important is because, as you'll see later on, of course, waste in the region isn't just controlled by the councils. There's a large proportion of the waste stream that goes to the main landfill, AB Lime, that is not under council's control. And so if we're going to influence how that waste stream is managed, we need the whole community to be on board with this. So it's a fairly normal strategic document. In the first half, it usually has a vision. The vision is often supported by goals and objectives. We set targets, and the targets are based on the action plan. So we look at the actions that are planned over the 6 years, and we work out what the impact of those actions are going to be, and that gives us our target for the plan. So in theory, if the action plan is delivered, we'll achieve our targets. We also, under legislation, have to include some other sections around monitoring, how we're going to report progress, how actions are going to be funded, and this is particularly important for your levy funds. If you're going to be using the waste disposal levy funds for anything, it has to be specified in your action plan. It also has to describe how you might make funds available to the community. So if you have a contestable fund that community groups can apply to, you have to describe in your WMMP how you're going to do that. And then finally, once again, your WMMP must reflect the New Zealand waste strategy and something called the waste hierarchy. And just before I move on to talk about those two things, this is just a bit of an overview of how we see the world with the WMMP. It should be your primary strategic document for waste management in the region, but there's a lot of other council plans and reports that interact with it, that feed into it, or that the WMMP might feed into. And some of the particularly relevant ones for your councils is the Section 17A review, which is the service review that you're undertaking, potentially having a consistent solid waste management bylaw in place. And then we have other council reports like infrastructure strategies, asset management plans, and then crucially we have the long-term plan and the annual plans, and this is where your action plan is delivered through allocating budgets from councils. Any questions on that before I move on to the New Zealand Waste Strategy? Great. So this is a bit of an interesting topic. As some of you may know, up until about 3 weeks ago, we had a New Zealand Waste Strategy called Te Rautaki Para. It was quite a lengthy document. It had a very specific strategic focus on the circular economy, which is what everybody's talking about at the moment. But that was replaced last month with a new New Zealand Waste Strategy, the Waste and Resource Efficiency Strategy. The primary goal of this strategy is to reduce waste and waste emissions, and that is to reduce environmental impacts and to meet climate targets. It's only 5 pages. It's very simple and straightforward, but this is what your new WMMP is going to need to be aligned with and to reflect. It has 5 key outcomes that you can see up here. And those are going to be delivered through 5 key work areas. And that essentially is the New Zealand Waste Strategy. Some other work that is going on at the national level that does have implications for the councils here. There was a lot of work done under the previous government into ways that curbside services could be standardised. And this is where some of these requirements around potentially introducing a curbside food scraps collection were included. However, the current government recently agreed that they were not going to progress with any of the curbside standardisation recommendations, apart from the one that has already been gazetted. And that one is the requirement that applies to household curbside recycling collections provided by councils. And this is the requirement that means that the Gore curbside recycling service is going to need to be changed, and the deadline for that is the 1st of January 2027. But all of the other requirements, which relate to things like food scraps collections and performance standards, are not going to be going ahead at this stage.
Sorry, can I
Yep.
just ask a question? So, for example, around that reduction of waste disposal per person, do they give a standard to meet there, or is that a local decision?
It's a local decision.
Right.
Yep. The only targets that actually relate to waste at the moment are those that come through the emissions reduction plan, and those are national targets.
Right.
You could translate those into action locally, but there are no specific targets in the waste strategy.
Thank you.
Look, my question is around a couple of things. Standardisation. Now, obviously, if you go to Dunedin, they've got more wheelie bins than I can count. and the hilliest streets in New Zealand, it's quite okay, and we've got 2. And it makes sense for us to have 2. Now, you talk about emissions. Now, emissions, obviously, from landfill, I'm not sure if you were here when I spoke to the previous climate change people, that landfills, a grade Class A landfill, is actually a power source. It's a bioreactor. Now, I can't believe the in national context would want to stop the fuel that created this free electricity, or not free, but this extra electricity that the country needs, removing its source right at the, the food waste. I just can't see the logic. And who are the people that think like this? I mean, what's gone wrong? Because you've got these, I've explained before about how a Class A landfill works. Captures emissions, turns it into electricity. Now you've got another group of people who want to have a wee compost collecting food scraps thing going on. There's more emissions come out of a compost heap than they do out of a landfill. And there's no gain, compared to generating a megawatt of electricity. I'm struggling here. So are these things ever challenged, or when do we get a chance to say, you're bonkers?
Yep, I totally get your points, and it's a conversation that we have frequently. So in terms of the emissions reduction plans, I mean, they always go out for consultation and comment. So you do have the opportunity to feedback. But what I think has happened with the emissions reduction plans is that they were based on a number of kind of standard industry factors that were agreed through a number of working groups even before the first emissions reduction plan came out. And I was involved in the working group for waste, the waste sector, and I can tell you that there was a lot of discussion within that reference group about certain key numbers. And one of those numbers is the lifetime gas capture rate for a Class 1A landfill. And we know that globally it's accepted to be roughly around 55 to 65%. And the reason that this is so much lower than AB Lime's snapshot on the day gas capture rate is because waste starts to break down before the gas capture system is put in. And this applies very specifically to organic waste that breaks down really quickly, like food scraps. So the proportion of the methane from those food scraps that they will actually capture is relatively low. And then during the lifetime of the landfill, when it's being actively used, the gas capture rate is quite high. And then once the landfill is closed, the gas capture system gets taken out after a period of time, but methane is still being produced. Right. So this is why we have 2 numbers that we look at, and one of them is the on the day, and one of them is the lifetime. The other thing that we have with AB Lime is a bit of a perverse outcome from the way that the Emissions Trading Act works, where as you mentioned earlier, you described the process where a landfill operator will say, I took in this amount of waste, that waste was made up of these materials, I'm going to use the standard factors and I'm going to predict that that waste is going to produce this much landfill gas. Here's how much we captured today. It was 130% of that number. And that happens because the default composition numbers that landfill operators are using at the moment don't actually reflect the waste that is actually going into the landfill. And I know that this is something that is currently under review for landfills, as are a number of other ways how the Emissions Trading Act actually applies, or the Emissions Trading Scheme applies to landfills. I think when we're talking about what our issues are and what we're going to do about them, the fact that landfills capture methane and turn it into electricity is just one factor that we need to look at. There's numbers that you can put to that, that's fine. But obviously there's also then the regional context that we need to look at. What are the alternatives? like you say, you do get emissions from composting, although they're carbon dioxide, not methane. But then also we have to take that through the political lens. We have to look at what national legislation and strategies we might need to be considering. So the numbers is only a part of the picture, and that is what we're focusing on today, but we will get to those other discussions later on.
Okay, we'll leave that one up for debate. I totally disagree, but won't carry on. The other one is the lack of national recognition, and I've been in WasteNet now for 15 years, of product stewardship. Now, do we just push that aside and actually erase that word from the English dictionary? Because it obviously does, no one wants to know about it. You know, any company making a product will just use whatever product they want to use. And we import stuff from overseas who really don't care what New Zealand does. We bring it in. So is it ever, this word product stewardship, which I learned about in 2010, is it ever going to come to life?
It is, but you're absolutely right. It's very slow. And anybody who's been involved in the waste industry for as long as both of us have are probably very frustrated with the lack of action on product stewardship. I guess one of the challenges when we're doing this type of work, working with local councils, is that absolutely, if product stewardship worked, it would be fantastic. It would have an amazing impact, especially in regions like this with such a significant agricultural sector. You know, that's one of the main areas that we look at for product stewardship. But you have relatively little ability to do anything about it. And this is one of the real frustrations in this whole local council waste planning process, and it's something that we have talked to the councils about quite a bit, is that you have the responsibility to point out the problems and to try and come up with ways to address them, but you don't necessarily have the ability or the influence to make them happen.
Why doesn't our government take a Trump-like attitude and say, well, if it's not in a container like this, you're not, take it off the shelves in New World?
Okay, well, I think you've made your points.
Yep.
When I see the Minister for the Environment next, I will pick up on your thoughts, Ian.
Give him my phone number.
I do.
Okay.
And so we will move on.
We'll
Thank
move
you.
on.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank you, Chair.
So a couple of other points on the national context that you're no doubt aware of. The waste disposal levy continues to be increased, and it was fairly recently also expanded to cover other disposal facilities apart from the class ones, which is where the landfills that we send our household waste to. And then finally, we need to reflect the waste hierarchy. And this is the latest version of the waste hierarchy that came out in the New Zealand waste strategy last month. It's no longer a triangle, but it's still essentially the same thing. And what the waste hierarchy tries to get across is a fairly blunt but useful way of thinking, which is that if we try and manage waste in using methods that are at the top of the hierarchy, which is reducing waste first and foremost, reusing, recycling, then the impact of those actions is going to be higher than the actions at the bottom of the hierarchy, which is waste disposal. And this is in the Waste Minimisation Act, so this is not something that we have a choice about. So I'm now going to move on to talking about some of the actual data from the waste assessment. So maybe just a quick check-in to make sure that everybody's clear about the planning process that we're working through before I start talking about what's actually in the waste assessment.
I think you've been clear.
Great, okay. So I don't expect anybody to look at this diagram and actually make sense of it. But the reason I included it is to show that the way that waste is managed in the Southland region is incredibly complex. And it's worth pointing out that this only represents the waste that goes to the Southern Regional Landfill. This doesn't even include all of the waste that goes to the other Class 1 landfill in the region. the other types of landfill, the waste that leaves the region to be recycled. The other reason I include this diagram is to show really clearly that the councils actually only have influence or control over this waste at certain points. And a lot of the waste actually goes to AB Lime without ever going through a council collection system or a council transfer station. What this also means is that we only have data available to us at some of those points as well. So we can carry out those audits that I mentioned earlier on council's curbside collections, at council's transfer stations, and with AB Lime's permission, we also undertook the audits at the landfill. But we don't know the composition of all of the rest of the waste that is moving around the region. So what do we know? This shows us how waste gets to AB Lime. And as you can see, there's a mixture of waste getting picked up at the curbside, then going through a transfer station. Sometimes it gets picked up at the curbside and goes directly to the landfill. Sometimes it goes through, just goes straight to a transfer station and then to landfill. But the interesting thing to point out here is that the part that council probably has the most influence over is the waste that's picked up at the curbside. And that makes up about 1/3 of what goes to AB Lime. You do have some influence over the waste that goes through your transfer stations, but once it's got to a transfer station, there's only so much that you can do to try and separate out materials for recycling or diversion. So this is one of the key challenges. We know what the problems are, but what influence and what control do we have to actually be able to address them? Once again, a set of numbers that you're probably not going to be able to read, but what this shows...
Sorry, just before you move on, the pie diagram,
Yep.
is that typical of other parts, other regions?
It varies enormously, to be honest. Council actually has control over a slightly higher proportion of the waste in Southland than in other areas. And this is because council has control over the transfer stations. In many other parts of the country, councils have actually pulled back from that transfer station provision, or in some cases, like with Waimakariri, which is another district that we're working with, a private transfer station has been established that's in direct competition with the council's transfer station. And so as soon as you start losing control over that transfer station waste, you lose the ability to understand it and you lose the ability to do anything about it. So yeah, I would say you're actually in a relatively good position in terms of your influence here. It could be worse.
Thank you.
So these numbers here show the composition of the waste that is going to landfill. And the red numbers are the ones that are particularly high, and the yellow numbers are the ones, or the green numbers, sorry, are the ones that are relatively low. Some of the interesting things about this number, if you compare the Southland region with the national average, which is that left-hand column, you can see there's some numbers that are quite different. One of those is the proportion of organic waste that's going to landfill, which is much higher than the national average. And this speaks to what we were going back to before. I don't want to say it again, but the emissions that are produced at the landfill. And what we know is that the actual tonnage of organic waste going to the landfill per capita is actually no higher than the rest of the country. The reason those numbers are higher is because some of the other crucial ones, like rubble, for example, are significantly lower. And this is actually a really good thing to see, because rubble should absolutely not be going into a class landfill. It's expensive, they have very little environmental impacts. They're fine to go into a different type of landfill, and that's obviously what is happening here in the Southland region. But what that does is it makes those other materials like the organics and the plastics and the paper look like they are proportionally higher. It does show where the primary opportunities are as well. So we can look at those numbers and we can separate out what we call potentially divertible. And what this term means is that we've just identified the types of materials that are going to landfill that could potentially be managed in other ways. And when we apply that to the waste that's going to AB Lime, we can see that roughly half of the waste that is currently going to AB Lime could be diverted somehow. And of course, diversion is not the other option. We can look at reduction and reuse as well. But for example, organic material could be getting composted rather than going to landfill. And the other large proportion is recyclables that could also be diverted. And emissions aside, this is really expensive. We calculated that this is costing roughly $5 million to send that material to landfill. This is picking it up, transferring it, bulking it, taking it to the landfill, paying the gate fee, paying the carbon unit cost, and paying the landfill levy cost.
Sorry, does that, when you think about the other option, that would have a cost in terms of collection and
Absolutely.
delivery as well, so that would come off the $5 million?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I look forward to the discussion we will have in detail rather than today of the consequences of that, particularly of the cost of other
I
options.
just have one interesting question. The question is, has anyone, has Eunomia worked out the emission factors from the pickup vehicles, which are diesel?
No, we have not, but you have had other consultants doing work for you, looking
But
specifically.
you would have that information.
We do that. We do that frequently for councils. When we look at the alternative ways of managing waste, we model usually the financial cost, the waste diversion impact, and the carbon cost, and we include all of those factors in our modelling. Fuel.
Yeah, I'm just wondering though.
Yeah,
what
and we are going through an exercise looking at the carbon
I'm
footprint.
just, so you do have that. So
Absolutely.
when you do say we need another glass collection, we need
Mhm.
another kitchen waste collection.
Yep.
These, you factor in the cost of the trucks.
Absolutely.
Right. Yet to
Right.
see an EV truck.
Next.
Oh, I've seen several. They're
you?
really fun. They'll be great around here. It's really flat.
She
They
hasn't
could go
been
and
to
charge up
Bluff.
at AB Lime. The other main composition information we look at is what's in your curbside rubbish. This is the rubbish that council collectors are picking up at the curbside. And that big grey chunk down the bottom is organics. This is not unusual. It's very, very common for a household rubbish bin to contain anywhere between 30 to 55% of organic waste. And this is mainly food scraps and garden waste that they could quite easily be doing something else with. A proportion of it is garden waste that would be difficult to manage in other ways. So, it's quite difficult to compost flax, for example. Most transfer stations won't take it in their green waste collections, but that's a relatively small proportion. You can also see that there's a fair amount of recyclables in there as well. So plastics and paper and glass. And then we can go through the same exercise that we did with the landfill waste. So we can look at those materials and we can pick out the ones that we can identify alternative management options for. So we get to 54% of compostable organic material, and 11% are recyclables. So these are the materials that are commonly accepted in curbside recycling collections, not in all councils, as we know, but the majority of councils collect these materials in their curbside recycling service. And once again, you could estimate that might cost $3.5 million to be collecting all of that material and then transferring it and sending it to landfill. Any questions on that? So the other key set of numbers that we calculate for the region is something that enables us to do some benchmarking against other councils and other parts of the country. So this is the amount of rubbish that is sent to landfill per capita in kgs. You can see they're very similar for the 3 councils in the Southland region. We know that regions that are more rural in nature tend to have a lower number. So it's not surprising that this is lower. And this is because in a lot of rural areas, waste never actually enters the formal management system at all. It stays on property. It follows one of what we call the 3 Bs, which is burying, burning, or bulk storage, which is the big pile behind the shed. And just to compare these numbers with some others from around the country, the national average is last year was 706 kilos. So you can see you're well under that. Auckland is one of the highest in the country at 873, and this is largely because of the amount of industrial activity that goes on in the city. Another really interesting one, particularly because they're so near to you, is Queenstown Lakes. We've just done their waste assessment and most of the way through the WMMP, and we calculated their per capita figure. Don't know if you can read it. It's 940, so it's nearly a tonne per person. And this is because Queenstown Lakes gets so many visitors. So when you add the visitor numbers to their population, it increases it almost by another twice again. Any questions on that? Otherwise, I'm just going to go on to talk through the key issues that we've identified from looking at all of this information.
Just a kind of related but unrelated question with that Queenstown one, because it's quite fascinating. They nearly double Southland. So does that tourism implication have quite an impact on the costs for the council in terms of non-ratepayers contributing to the problem but not really paying for it?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and it also makes it really difficult because a lot of that waste, of course, because they're not actually living in the district, it's going through the hotels and the restaurants and all of the commercial sources. So when you look at the waste that goes to the landfill in Queenstown, a really high proportion of it comes through from the commercial sector. So I think council's control is roughly 8% in Queenstown. The other thing that they suffer from is when you get your waste disposal levy payment, it's calculated based on the number of people in the country, and then it's paid out per capita. So a district that has really high visitor numbers, creating all of that waste, that doesn't feature in the calculation for their waste disposal levy payment at all. So other districts have similar problems, Thames Coromandel, the far north. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so to move on to the key issues, and just bear in mind that the waste assessment is intended to be a fairly agnostic report. You know, we don't take the political context into account terribly much. It's really factual, it's data analysis. Let's look at the information and see what that tells us. So what we can see in the region is that there are large quantities of organic waste going to landfill. This creates methane emissions, some of which are captured and turned into electricity, but it also represents a lost resource, which also comes into the carbon calculations because you could potentially be using a natural soil amendment product rather than a manufactured fertiliser, for example. There's only moderate quantities of construction waste going to landfill compared to many other parts of the country, but it is still an opportunity. Waste infrastructure is a real issue, as it is for many councils in the kind of lower south. Most of our reprocessing infrastructure in the country tends to be located around our population centres. So it's in the North Island, mostly in Auckland. And this leads on to the next point, which is glass in particular. The only glass reprocessing facility we have in the country is in Auckland. Glass is intensive to move around. It costs a lot, it uses lots of fuel, and so if we can find a way to manage glass more locally, then that would be a huge opportunity. We identified the variability in curbside services, and as we've already discussed, there are requirements coming through the curbside standardisation changes, and in particular that is the need to expand the materials that are collected in Gore District Council's curbside recycling service. There is a bylaw in place in some areas but not in others, and so it's definitely an issue that there is a lack of regulation, and also we can see an opportunity to make this more comprehensive and for it to be delivered consistently across the region. So this would make it easier both for the people that are impacted by the regulation but also for those that are trying to enforce it. We don't understand very well how farm waste is being managed. I'm sure everybody's got the anecdotal stories, and you don't have to drive very far before you see the burn piles. But in a factual way, we don't actually understand very well how much there is, what it is, and whether there are opportunities to manage it better. And similarly, we don't understand very well how rural households are managing their waste, or what it is. We assume it's going to be relatively similar to an urban household, but we don't know for sure. Textiles is usually something that we highlight because they have a really significant impact in terms of carbon emissions when they are made. They're a very challenging problem to solve. It's really one of those issues that needs more central government action around product stewardship, as we were discussing earlier. And we usually highlight medical waste because most parts of the country have an ageing population. Medical issues are tending to be managed at home more and more often, and so that creates medical waste that we need a really clear, safe management pathway for. And the last one on that list is disaster waste management, which is something else that is becoming increasingly high profile across the country. There's already been quite a bit of work done on disaster waste management here in the Southland region, but it's just an issue that we highlight in terms of the resilience of infrastructure and systems. So the next step in the process is to look at those key issues and to think how we could potentially address them. And we don't necessarily just focus on council's role, because as we discussed earlier, a lot of these problems are actually out of council's control, and so it's going to be really challenging for the councils to actually influence them. But we can set out council's role in other ways. So you can be a supporting partner, you can identify the strategic need, you can take a facilitation role, you can be the regulator through improving that local regulation that we were talking about, and you can also be potentially a part funder, such as supporting other organisations to make funding applications to the National Waste Minimisation Fund, for example. So that's where we're at the moment. We have completed the waste assessment to a final draft. The Medical Officer of Health is currently working through the process of reviewing that and providing any feedback that they have. Once the waste assessment can be finalised and we've got that feedback from them, then the waste assessment, I believe, is going to come back to this group for presentation. You receive the waste assessment, and alongside that will be a recommendation as to whether the WMMP needs to be rewritten or not. We rarely see a WMMP that doesn't need to be rewritten, but not wanting to preempt that decision. Assuming that you do decide that we need to write a new WMMP, then we start moving into those discussions around what the strategic direction is going to look like. That will dictate the actions that we choose to include in the WMMP and then we go out for that public consultation phase. But my understanding is with a local government election coming up this year, then that's not going to happen before the election. So that will be taken through under the new councils. And then, yeah, the really challenging bit is actually implementing it and making it happen. That's it from me.
All right.
Any more questions?
Yes. In terms of, I guess, what we talked about earlier is in June we'll be receiving that material for consideration. Will we do that as part of the meeting, or should we be looking at doing it as a workshop?
I think a workshop would allow a bit more discussion around the issues, if that's acceptable.
Any other feedback and comment from around the table on what is a fairly substantial work stream, and grateful that we've actually got the resources that we're able to call in to help through this with someone who's involved elsewhere, taking advantage, I guess, of the synergies that arise from that. So there appears to be nothing else. So thank you for coming here today and bringing us up to date, both in terms of process, but also in terms of some key issues that I look forward to debating. And it will be a debate with a couple of people around this table on some of them, which is great, because that's what we need to be having in-house before we go out to public. So once again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
I'll go out and enjoy the rain some more. I haven't got very much of that up
Yeah,
our
it's
way.
something we haven't seen a lot of recently, so yeah, do enjoy it.
I'm in the Eastern Bay of Plenty, so it's very dry where we are.
Oh, you can take it back with you.
Yeah.
It's coming from the south, but what's coming from the north is probably going to impact you more.
I've only got carry-on luggage. Unfortunately, I don't think they'd let me take some rain on the plane. Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of the formal part of the meeting. So I will close that, and thank you everyone for your attention. And we will now move into a workshop that we are starting a little bit earlier, but I see you're expecting to take about 45 minutes. We might just have a convenient stop for 5 minutes and catch up on other things that are happening in the big wide world. Have they had the play off yet?
Fantastic. So this is a repeat of the exercise that we undertook last year to review where WasteNet is at and to look forward for our strategic direction for the coming year in particular, but also taking a longer lens this year with consideration of the 3 years to come. So it really walks through where we're at in terms of current state, looking ahead to our work program, and also providing some context around legislation and the like. Fortunately, for me, a lot of the heavy lifting's already been done with the previous presenters. Lisa's given us a good in-depth review of where we're at in terms of legislation, and also provided some of the key data in terms of actual waste coming through the system. So that was why this presentation was at the end, but it's really the purpose of this is to get some feedback and some direction around priorities for the coming year for us as WasteNet. So just a very quick reminder about the purpose, being effective and efficient stewards of waste. So that's pulled directly from our current waste management and minimisation plan, and obviously to use the waste hierarchy to guide decision making for WasteNet. Again, just very briefly, I know we've seen this slide a number of times throughout the year as we've had different workshops for service contracts, workshops and the like, but just to refresh which functions fall within each of the different entities as it is. So WasteNet being the first column there, the ICC held contract for recycling services, and then just to highlight that the individual councils do still have some level of responsibility, which again we've touched on today about where different things sit within some of those. So you've seen that before, so I won't dwell on that one. And again, as I've just said, Lisa's given us a good update on this, so I won't refresh where we're at. It's just to highlight that there are, again, a number of pieces of legislation under review. So
You could almost add the Local Government Act to that one as well.
it's like,
We still got that?
Although they say rubbish is one of our core responsibilities.
Some would say that we are rubbish.
one of the things that I will highlight for that slide is the waste levy. So that is part of set under the Waste Management Act at the moment, and it's one of the things that has been signalled quite strongly by central government that it will be reviewed. So Lisa explained at the moment how it's portioned out based on population, but one of the signals coming through from central government is that will be an element reviewed where they will look for a more equitable framework to address some of the issues that Lisa talked about, so tourism and things like that. So that's something that we might see change once that legislation does move through.
And as part of that process, it will be looking at the way the money is spent, contracting in some areas and expanding in others, which will potentially have impacts on the three councils and the way that they use the money.
Yes.
Sorry, can I just ask, did we put submissions in on the legislation that's being reviewed, such as the Litter Act?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
we will. Thank
Yeah.
you. So, and they'll come back through this committee.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
intention is to do it as an amalgamated for the region. So again, we've talked about that one and the fact that since these slides were drafted, it's changed in terms of timeframes. So we shall see where that one lands in terms of having revised Waste Management Act and Litter Act. I've highlighted here around the Climate Change Response Act and Emissions Act because I think it's important that although the Waste Act and the Litter Act drive action, that these pieces of legislation will equally drive action for the waste sector, and it's not something in our current WMMP that it links clearly to, just with that timing when the WMMP was first drafted. So just something to be conscious of, that these pieces of legislation will equally potentially drive action for us.
Sorry, just as a further question and relates to our early discussion, just around the organic waste management and the landfill gas capture. So I was just saying before that I have a difficulty understanding the discussion that, or the cost to us of the lack of organic waste collection, and the fact that I understand AB Lime are encouraging the organic waste collection because then they capture the emissions, you know, through their processes. Yet what we see from the earlier presentation was saying, you know, it's a significant cost to us to, and we should be thinking about a separate collection. So I'm not clear about, I guess, the information we're getting.
Yeah.
So we have, Morrison Lowe have been engaged to lead the Section 17A review for the service contract renewals, and as part of that they are modelling up different scenarios around waste diversion and options, and that includes emissions from vehicles, processing emissions, as well as costs for the different options. So if you divert organics, you might save this much in terms of landfill disposal levy, but then what's it going to cost to run the extra service and the different processing options, say for green waste. So those cost models are being drafted at the moment, and we'll come back to each of the individual councils later this month, the first week of May.
So does that then incorporate what AB Lime is saying that they can achieve with the organic waste and balances that information?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ian?
Following on from that is that that last presentation, very quick to have what, if we diverted all of that, this is what we'd save. But when questioned about the cost of picking up extra collection runs and the emissions from the trucks and everything, you would have expected that to be there ready to say how much it was. And it was quickly deferred from my viewpoint. So I'm very keen for a second opinion on life.
Yeah, don't lose sight of it. I think you have common ground around this table in terms of all well and good to say these are the potential costs that you're exposed to, but until we actually see the balance from the work that have been done as part of the Section 17A. So it is coming to us, yeah, we can deal with it then, but point noted.
Yeah.
Neville?
Sorry, yeah, well, especially when they add up together, you know, you're talking about 65% of a bin is full of recyclable material, either made up of, 54% of organics and 11% of recyclable is made up in the bin. So, yeah, I'm just not quite sure about their figures.
No, not at all. In fact, you'd almost want to, in a perfect world, reduce the amount of bins and pickups that you had in your neighbourhood, just through traffic congestion, safety, you name it. I mean, we're a Flat Earth Society in Invercargill, and your pickup trucks couldn't have a better environment. But
Don't forget Bluff.
oh, and Bluff. Yeah. Sorry.
Not quite as level. But if you think the comments were made earlier too about rural areas, I don't know about others, but I get a wheelie bin collection once a month, and have a nice little thing going for my green waste in my backyard. It's probably from a point of view of discharges completely undesirable, but what's the practical way in a rural area of actually dealing with green waste?
I mean, I at home, I mean, I didn't mention to the lady, but I have a 3-year trinium cycling system. It's 10 cubic metres, so 3 lots of 3 cubic metres. One's 3 years old, which we're using now on the garden, and the other 2 are in the process of turning into compost. Now, the emissions coming off those must be reasonably substantial, but I know of a lot of, you'll know a lot of people who compost at home.
Yeah, and even the emissions of the rubbish trucks that are travelling around the rural areas,
Yes.
picking up the odd bin here and there.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Leave it to Fiona.
Again, you have all seen this slide on a number of occasions, but it's just to reiterate how the activity is funded in terms of the difference between solid waste activities by each of the individual councils, and then the waste net scope being the admin fee on the landfill and our current reserves. So, where we're looking in terms of fees, I've put up there on the right-hand column just around the forecast that we've got. So emissions trading scheme, the market's been quite stagnant, so we're expecting costs to be at or about the same. The levy has gone up another $5 and will continue to do so for the next 2 years, so that's where government is sending signals for waste diversion through continually increasing that levy for anything that's going into landfills.
And I converted those figures to percentages. So for the ETS, the percentage of the total drops from 31 to 29 and stays at 29 at $66. The waste levy goes 25%, 28%, 29%. So as a percentage of the total cost, it's up slightly. Contract landfill fee, 36%, 35, 34. Dropping ever so slightly, and the waste net admin gate fee 8.5%, 8.7 and down to 8.3 is the projection. So they're not jumping around a lot. There's just little variations, and while the dollar figures are going up in terms of the overall percentages, not much shift over the table there at all.
That ETS fee though was worked out on a supposedly scientific approach to how much a landfill actually emits. Now, I mean, that's you look at it, that's a large component of what we pay. So, where's the factual evidence from the government?
And if you're getting 113% of the theoretical discharge that they're being used, then clearly the figures are being used, and if the discharge coming off the landfill is a lot higher than what they're assuming, then that would tend to indicate the fee's going to get a lot higher as well.
And just further to that, and we touched on this last year, and I know it's complicated and part of the contract, but we do need to keep watching brief on how we can translate some of the savings or benefits that AB Lime is getting out of the electricity generation from the methane, when we're actually, to Rangi's point, we're paying a premium for the ETS, but we are actually generating. So yeah, it's not quite lining up with reality for us, but it'd be good to keep a watching brief.
From a business plan point of view, they've really got an excellent operation there, because we're being charged to deliver the material to them that they're then using as an input into income generating.
But is there the chance that we can partner with them?
Well, I think as part of the contract negotiations coming up for 27.
In their installation of generators. Can we partner with them?
It's something worth having a think about. Is it something that we should be getting into? That's, I guess, is that a management plan issue or something more strategic?
I think, you know, from what you're raising there, we're providing the fuel, and obviously they, you know, I think they may appreciate some extra investment. I don't know. Who would, at what level of this room would start such a negotiation, or even just break the ice?
Well, I'd actually be looking at the senior staff of councils. That's the type of thing that should be talked about, I guess, behind closed doors as part of the more financial stuff that is being dealt with. I don't know if any of the staff over there want to provide some input, comment, please.
Thanks there, Keith. I guess, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of it. And we have been in discussions recently with AB Lime through Fiona around some of the work they're doing in terms of their contract setup, etc. And that relationship's really important. So I think that will be an ongoing discussion. If there is an appetite from this group for us to be looking at those opportunities in more detail, then absolutely we can make sure that we're having those discussions openly with them.
I think Southern District had the biggest number of organics, so we should potentially get the bigger discount. And
some of the Invercargill cities kitchen food waste is pretty pungent.
And the smaller councils before, because they're behaving better, probably should receive more benefit as a reward.
Okay.
So I think we've covered all potential bases and we'll move on.
So the last number here is obviously the admin gate fee, and that will be informed by the budget, the draft budget that comes back for input. At the moment, I've put it as a stagnant number, but depending where the budget lies and what the appetite is for reviewing that or not. So that's just a graphical representation of how the numbers have moved over time. And obviously one of the interesting ones is just the ETS, with how that's influenced by government policy to release or constrain the ETS market. So, in terms of the reserves, I've just put a summary up for what reserves have been allocated to over the past few years. Most recently, we had 375k allocated to support work streams for reviewing the WasteNet agreement, the WMMP and waste assessment, so the work that UNOMU have been undertaking, and to initiate work around the bylaw with legal input, which is obviously early days, and most significantly is the contract renewal work streams. So that's where a large portion of those funds were allocated. But as you can see, obviously the reserve has been accumulating over time.
And I had envisaged that as part of the agreement review with the councils, that what would flow out of that would also be some agreement/direction on the way that the reserves are used. To date, I believe we've used them appropriately in terms of triggering some work streams, but we also need, I think, to start soon identifying maybe the criteria or ways in which the reserve can be allocated. So as part of the WasteNet agreement review, some discussions are being held, I guess, by our shareholder councils. Christine?
Thank you. You've answered my question in part, but the other query is, do we actually keep collecting further rates that increases our reserve at that amount? So at what point do we have that discussion as well?
I would see the key time to have made a decision on that is when we're setting the budget for next year. But if you would like to have a preliminary discussion of the underlying issues with it, we could quite possibly do that at our next meeting in June. Ian?
Same question Christine raised could be said about ACC. They got 50 billion in the bank, but we're still paying ACC. So when are we going to stop paying ACC? We're not. We're going to continue doing that.
Yeah, and
we're going to continue charging a gate fee.
There are, I believe, some projects of regional and potentially national benefit that we possibly should be looking at in the next year's budget. And it might be an opportunity in the discussion at the next meeting to share some of those things and get some feedback. Were you going to say something, Rob?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you've covered off what I was going to say.
Okay. Neville?
Also, I think that gives us greater autonomy in having to invest, like we were talking just before, to invest. So you invest it in the right way, so in the long term, it reduces the ratepayers' cost too. And that's what we're here for, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's an investment fund, I guess you're saying, long term, that brings benefit to the ratepayers.
Correct.
Yeah. That's generated a bit of thought. We'll start
Yeah.
with Rob and then to Ian.
Just in the weeds question, but I assume we get interest on those reserves?
Yes. Ian?
It's an area. I think if we were to be proactive, say, on litter, that is a fund that we can go to.
Yeah, totally.
And litter affects all of Southland.
Yeah,
you know how beautiful it is. I drove to Queenstown back yesterday and it was magnificent, and the roads were quite clean, but I imagine each area has niche problems. Some of the pullover areas and what do they call those parking areas, caravans and stuff. Yeah, so I think that can be used up quite quickly if we do stuff like that proactively.
Yeah.
So again, I won't dwell on this one. We've had Lisa provide an update, but this is just the target that's in the current WMMP in terms of obviously trying to encourage waste minimisation and diversion. And I won't spend too long on these slides. They're just extracts of the data that UNOMIA have provided. So you've seen these numbers already in terms of where we sit regionally and individually for rubbish to landfill. And the composition of that material. So I won't dwell on those ones.
Just a point on that, 650 kilograms, that's been the same for 15 years.
So potentially, should there be an appetite to rewrite the WMMP, then is that number still appropriate? Or?
Well, is it evaluated, how often is it evaluated? How often do we get to that 650?
Yeah.
How often do we do the evaluation?
So we do it every year, at the end of every year, but we haven't hit that number for quite some time. And it's the way that the target is written is a bit nuanced because it's everything that goes into the waste stream rather than just landfill waste. So it's a little bit of a funny metric.
Oh, okay.
One of the ones we haven't talked about today is just around contamination from our recycling stream. We did talk a little bit about where those numbers are trending with the recent bin inspections, and I've just popped the cost up there in terms of direct cost for year to date of that equivalent cost of year to date of putting that material to landfill from the recycling system.
In terms of contamination, comment that was made earlier that WasteNet's responsible for picking up some of the roadside litter bins. Is that a lot higher in terms of contamination, that source, compared to the average?
I don't think we pick up any recycling bins.
Right, so it's just the red bin equivalent
Yep.
we pick up. So who picks up the recycling? The councils?
There are no public recycling bins that I'm aware of.
Well, we might have an issue there in the first place, yes.
We have a few in Gore that are managed by either through Pakiki or through Bombs,
Right.
Paddy's directly.
Direct.
And any data in terms of contamination of those?
Yeah, there is some contamination, but because we have glass collection separate, the money that Pakiki Lions get through their recycling schemes higher than the normal recycling costs because of the cleanliness of their recycling.
Right.
We've got a number of spots spread through Southland as well, specifically for recycling, but that's managed through the same pickup as the recycling.
Sorry, through the same pickup as?
The recycling.
Right.
So it doesn't. It's not on the 2 weekly cycle, but it is picked up by the same outfit. So.
Right. Okay. Christine?
Sorry, and I thought we had data in the last year that talked about the recycling options within the towns is contaminated. That's in my memory somewhere.
Yeah.
So do you have much contamination within those bins?
I haven't
Because
got
what
that.
is the one in Mosburn, Riverton?
Yeah, Lumsden, Mosman, Riverton, Tokanui,
Yeah.
they're all over the show.
Yeah. Be interesting, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Very good. So just to summarise, I know there was an earlier paper on the agenda around where we're at in terms of executing the current strategic plan. So generally on track. I've just put up the key highlights there in terms of the activities undertaken year to date. So having initiated the WMMP and having completed the waste assessment. And we're on track to deliver that draft WMMP, should that be the direction from the waste assessment being received by this group for the 31st of July. We've also initiated the regional service contract reviews, so the workshops completed to date and the ones occurring at the end of this month. Bin inspections have obviously been reintroduced across the region, and the joint agreement review pending that Section 17A review, which will then again come back to the individual councils. So in terms of the 2024-25 strategic plan, we've made good inroads to the work program that we set out at the start of last year. I have put up a very brief summary just about the engagement and education activities that we've undertaken this year, and I've broken it down by schools, residential and community, and business. So there's a slide later on to gather some feedback around is this appropriate, and there were earlier comments about is the money being spent to drive the best behaviour change. So that's what we have completed and delivered this year. It's very tiny. I don't know, you'll be able to, I don't know if I can actually blow that up. But it's the same format that we've used for 24-25. Hopefully everyone can actually read it on the copy that they've got. Essentially it looks at where we would be aiming for in terms of our target conditions. So our WMMP, which is a work in progress, would ideally guide where we are aiming, so that might be something that is a watching brief as we move through that process next year. The benefit that we do have is that we've got some greater guidance from central government in terms of the waste strategy. So we had the draft one last year, and that's undergone a number of changes, and in last month was settled with the new waste strategy. So we've got some confidence there, which helps us to move forward. In terms of the right-hand side, a lot of it will look very familiar from what we had this year. We're obviously midway through a number of those key work streams, particularly around the joint agreement, so making sure we've got that framework. So that's one that's proposed to be retained for the coming year. We've also got the bylaw, which has been spoken about earlier today, and the WMMP, again being partway through those two processes, and ones that will flow over until next year. The retention of making sure that WasteNet is operating effectively as a business unit, obviously that's a key element to delivering all of this, so that's proposed to be retained. The two big ones there are around our contract renewal, so two parts to that. First of all, the procurement strategy, contract tendering, and then looking longer term as the implementation of whatever changes may come from that. We've got education and engagement with a slight change to it proposed there, to take a step back and look at what are we doing in that space, and is it actually effective, rather than just rolling with what we have done again. So that's the first line there, is to refresh that strategy. And lastly is around the legislative requirements and regional projects. So this one is a little bit of a crystal ball in some regards, because as we know, things can change quite rapidly in this space in terms of legislative requirements. But one of the lines there is picking up on the thread earlier around that AB Lime engagement. So that's the first one there, and organics support for community initiatives. So coming out of our organic strategy and review by Tonkin and Taylor late last year was the signal to support more community-led initiatives. So that's the proposed strategic plan. There's nothing too new from what everyone is already aware of and what we have been working on this year, and I think that's just reflective that they're not short-term projects there.
So the grey areas for the bylaw will need to slide out, and you may even want to have a dappled grey area to indicate it's really dependent on government to progress that one before. I don't want to get to the end of the next year and have all red boxes there when it's not our fault. So I think we need to recognise that that one's on a bit of a sledge that will need to slide. Ian.
Look, it's been interesting being on this committee for 15 years. Looking back I mean, you know, and looking to where we are now, and you see our partners, you see, you know, we've talked about AB Lime, how they've, you know, taken initiatives and they're doing, you know, moving forward with their capture and electricity. You look at the recycling people have done the bale wrap thing, and they're looking at, you know, they're progressing. In the 15 years, you know, I've seen that, but what I haven't seen is anything out of central government to make life easier. Nothing in 15 years. And it doesn't matter whether it's red or blue in power, whoever, you know, the underlying people who look after this, it's been very static. It's just the same old, same old, same old. But everyone else in the peripherals, and it's up to councils have been innovative, but there's definitely been no help from central government. One bit.
Well,
Not
I think
seen in
the
15
important
years.
words were there's plenty that's come out of central government, but on waste issues over time. But I think your key words were that it hasn't been particularly helpful, and at an operational / both strategic level, that's our role to fill the gap on a number of issues where we have a statutory right to do so.
No, absolutely, and that's why I think it's very important that we look at our partnerships with you know, the landfill and the recycling and even the collection people, and we do it to the best. We shouldn't be influenced too much by someone's purist consultant view. You know, I think there's got to be a bit of reality here, and hopefully we will get there by doing that.
Yeah, don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
Cheers. Rob?
Just some feedback on this actual report. I think it's exemplar for how a report should be done for a committee. I think it's kind of, especially I like that follow-up parking lot piece, but in terms of communicating with our respective councils, I think you've got one document here that sums up everything WasteNet really well. So just want to acknowledge that it's quite hard to get a lot of information in one piece of paper like this, but I just think it's been done really well.
Yeah, but there's more. But first, Barry.
Yeah, I'll be, the radio announcing and that, I think it's a very good success, and I'll be very interested to see what this bin inspection report comes out with.
Yeah, well, in 2 slides we'll be talking about that a bit more. Yeah, fine. Yeah.
So just on that, I was quite keen to get some feedback. I've popped up some ideas there around our draft engagement plan. Obviously, we'll take a step back and we'll do this a little bit more formally, but just was keen to get some feedback as we start moving through that process. So you've seen what we have done, but there are opportunities to look at other ideas. I know previously it's been discussed around increased engagement, for example, with secondary schools rather than focusing just on primary schools. So there are some different options on how we can approach that, and I think it's approaching it with the outcome of sustained behaviour change is what we're trying to target. So having that at the forefront of our mind when we look back at some of the things that we have been doing and questioning, does that drive sustained behaviour change?
Thoughts around the table? I do find it at times hearing the same ads for Invercargill and Gore when they don't necessarily apply to Gore. So I think a little bit of refinement in terms of the way that some of that is targeted. Or maybe I'm listening to an Invercargill radio station. But we've got local radio stations in Gore, and maybe we should be doing something that's bespoke that actually fits the Gore area. Christine?
Just to clear, I talked earlier about evaluation of how successful is. I don't have the solution for how that evaluation occurs. For example, the number who are responding, the number who hear it. So, when do the enhancements occur? Are they happening in the local radio area? It's kind of a bit nebulous at the moment, isn't it, to work out how effective they are, and if people hear them, are they actually listening and taking action? And it's the same with the social media.
both Gore and Environment Southland are very effectively using Antenno to put messaging out there on a regular basis. And I'm just wondering if that is a tool that can be looked at a bit more. And it's almost taking advantage of, we're heading into a long holiday weekend. What are the messaging that you want to put out there for that may be different to other times? You actually need to check, are your council delivery days the same, or put some information up to help people. Some of the ones that pop up on Gore is telling you that a road has been sealed today and stay away from the area. Are there things happening that are at the landfills that we should be taking the opportunity, at the transfer stations, if there's anything untoward happening, putting it up on Antenno saying, don't come today. And even after some of the storms that we've had where there's been a rush on, a lot of green waste needed to go to the transfer station in Gore and probably elsewhere, of actually using the messaging available in Antenno. Just a thought.
Yeah, all four councils use it, I think.
Right, okay. It's just I'm not on your one. Yeah. I'm not a resident of an authority that your area covers at this stage. Neville.
I've got a bit of a different opinion to what you think about your radio. Well, I believe actually it should stay district-wide. For the fact is that if it generates the thinking of, for the Gore residents, say for argument's sake, right? If it generates their thinking about, oh, someone might come along and inspect my bin, oh, that doesn't really actually go in there, I might put it there. If it saves 1%, that's one person, so that saves, keep saving things. But at the end of the day, if for argument's sake, we do come back to the original, the way things were, and I dare say probably it will happen, then, people have got used to those advertising that the bins are going to be inspected, and if it does happen, they're well aware of it. But we can also use Antenno to say, okay, the collection of our bins are this particular day and so forth, but why disrupt the point about that they're going to not being inspected, and you're getting mixed messages across to the people. Some people just don't really care if the bins are going to be inspected or not, and they'll throw it in regardless. But I think if they've got that point, that if they're listening to the radio and say, oh, well, I may just hold myself from putting that in there, is it not a win for everybody?
Okay, good point. Any other feedback?
That's why I'd just like it'd be interesting to see what the percentage is decreasing from 17% or 18% this year. If it's actually decreasing with the bin inspections, it'd be actually quite interesting, actually. Sorry.
Barry.
Yeah, you and me went to that Hedgehog Enviro school thing. I found that invaluable.
Yep.
And the kids were really enthused with it. So I think we need to really push that one.
They ask really awkward questions at times.
Yeah, they did, yeah. It was good.
Yes. Sorry?
Oh, I have a question. So that's on the Enviro schools. They recently ran a marine, like a water quality day, where they had presentations from Otago Uni there. They had like bowls of sea creatures and things that the kids could put their hands in, and they had models around how fertiliser moves through the waterways and things like that. And there is an opportunity to run one of those days as a waste focus in partnership with Enviro schools, potentially with input from the likes of Thriving Southland, Environment Southland. So if that's something that there was an appetite to explore just on the back of that Enviro schools, not funding as such for Enviro schools, but more just looking how we can leverage their connections with the schools by running some of those waste days. If there's an appetite to look at some different things around, at the moment we focus quite heavily just on waste-free wander, but whether we should explore some of those other avenues as well.
If there's some messaging suitable for the age group and can be presented in a way that's entertaining, sure, look at it. the Dunedin Stadium over the weekend, they had a natural environment type day and had people doing lots of things in terms of, I think one of them was finding stones in amongst sand or other metal in amongst sand. So, you know, there may be some scope there to do some things. But the other thought that comes to mind is some of the recycling that takes place, like the crushed grass that has now been processed in Invercargill, is it? You know, having some of that stuff there that actually shows that if you do recycle the glass, this is one of the options that's currently available, particularly given the cost of getting it through to Auckland is the other option.
Maybe looking at the school curriculum and understanding where we can provide a resource to that school curriculum and what's happening locally as well. So there could be videos put together, for example, that are available to the teacher.
And it was one of the Southland towns, was it Otauto or one of them that had 100% pass rate with...
Manapori.
Sorry?
Manapori.
Yeah, 100% pass rate with their green waste. And I commented online on the social media and got a few comments back that, you know, we should be highlighting that sort of thing as part of the messaging as well. Probably not going as far as what used to happen 20, 30 years ago of having the tidiest street in the town, but maybe the best performing town in the whatever. Yeah, we need to be given recognition to those sorts of things, and it's all good positive publicity.
I think the idea of just having videos and video clips available, it's an ongoing resource rather than providing a person.
Yep.
At the time, they're available across and can be incorporated into the curriculum.
And we recently had the opening of a flat glass recycling plant here in Invercargill 2 weeks ago that the Minister went to the opening of. Did you know anything about that?
Yes, yep. Yeah, so they're collecting glass from construction sites and things.
Right. Well, again, that's part of our waste stream, and I think it's something that is worthy of putting it out there. So any other feedback? Next steps. Okay, next steps.
So the next steps are for us to finalise and we'll bring back the strategic plan for endorsement, and then the budget, obviously that sits beside that as well. So that will be in June.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our workshop then, and to the end of our meeting today. I've got to say I'm really encouraged by what was in our agenda for the meeting today, some of the discussions that we've had and the outcomes that we've reached. I think that the staff resourcing that we have available to us shows that we are progressing on a number of fronts. So for you, Fiona, thank you. And to the other staff in terms of the input that you get from them, and to the people around the table, thank you for your input today. I think it is probably one of the best WasteNet meetings that I've attended in terms of seeing things progressing. So until next time in June, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks.